Hey folks, Eder from Brain Pulp TV, and it is, as of this recording, January 19th, 2019. It is the beginning of the pre-release weekend for the newest expansion from Magic the Gathering, Ravnica Allegiance. Now, every time Wizards of the Coast comes out with one of these new expansions, they create 2 new Planeswalker decks. Well, once they came out with 5. We're not going to talk about that. Normally, they come out with 2 new Planeswalker decks, and this time is no exception. There is the Domri City Smasher deck, and the Dovin Architect of Law deck. Now in this video, we're going to be opening up the Domri City Smasher Planeswalker deck. Now if you've never seen one of these opening videos here before, we don't do a lot of opening videos, but we do each of the Planeswalker decks because we actually play the Planeswalker decks against each other in a show called the Mana Cave. We have a tournament that goes on through most of the year with these different Planeswalker decks to see who is going to reign supreme, which means these Planeswalker decks do have sort of a special place in our heart here on the channel. So I'm going to open up the box, show you what you can expect to find in one of these Planeswalker deck boxes. Then I'm going to go through the deck itself, every single card starting with the Planeswalker all the way down to the basic lands in it. I'll then talk about sort of an overview of the deck, how I see it, how I think it's supposed to run, maybe some of the flaws within the deck, because when I talk about these Planeswalker decks, I'm going to be talking about them differently than I would a competitive deck or like a challenger deck type thing. These are entry-level products. They're meant for newer players or casual players. They're not meant to take the standard world by storm, so I do sort of look at them through that lens. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that some of these decks couldn't have been improved with just a little bit of extra care, in my opinion at least. That said though, the Domri deck is actually pretty solid for a Planeswalker deck, so I'm not really going to have a whole lot that I'm critical of with this one. Then at the end of this video, as sort of a cherry on top, I'm going to be opening up the 2 packs of Ravnica Allegiance that comes with the deck for you guys to check out. Okay, so now that I've gone over all that, we're ready to begin. Let's crack this sucker open and see what's inside. Okay, I do enjoy opening up decks, the Planeswalker decks. I've done every one since they started coming out. And I enjoy playing with them as well too on the Mana Cave, so I'm going to carefully try to take the Planeswalker out of the package. There we go. Now these are foils. I didn't mention that before, but the Planeswalkers that do come with this deck are foils, so let the curling begin. And there's more packaging here, but there's also the deck box. Now, some folks have said they've had trouble getting sleeved cards in here. One of the things they suggested was it was because Ultra Pro penny sleeve style cards, or not cards, sleeves, were too wide to fit into the box. Other folks were thinking maybe some people were trying to sleeve both the deck itself and the 2 packs of cards and put them all in here. Now that won't work because there's barely enough room when you use Dragon Shield sleeves to sleeve up the deck and have it fit in here. But for me, I've never once had a problem with sleeving these up with Dragon Shields and having them fit in the deck box. So as you can see, deck box here, it's got some wonderful little artwork on it. It also has his name on the side in case, you know, he forgets what his name is. There's also 2 packs of Ravnica Allegiance. Now we're going to be opening these up later in the video, but I'm just going to set these aside from now. And then we have this fold out here. If I can unfold it, there we go. Talks about what a Planeswalker is, which can actually be confusing for new players, and this is a product that's targeted towards newer players. It also has a bit of information on the City Smasher himself, as well as going over some of the terms that you will find on these cards, including Riot, which is a huge mechanic in this particular deck. And then, of course, you have the deck itself right here. I'm going to talk about each and every card in just a moment, but first I'm going to open this up because there are a few other insert cards in here that I want to talk about first. So in previous Planeswalker decks, they used to include this sort of fold out, which was a rules reference guide. They've since replaced that with these cards here. This one talks about all the various phases of your turn in play. This one mentions how to cast spells, and on the other side, it goes over the ins and outs of attacking and blocking. This card just simply mentions a few popular formats of Magic, including Standard, Booster Draft, and Commander. However, on the flip side of this card, which I'm about to show you, there is something that they started to include in these Planeswalker decks with just the last set of Planeswalker decks since Magic Arena has been in open beta. And I think it's a very, very great idea that Wizards has started to include this in these decks. So what you see here is a card. My thumb is covering up a special code which is specific to this deck. Now, what this code will do is it's going to unlock this particular Planeswalker deck on Magic Arena. Now, you can only use this code on one account once. So that's why my thumb is covering it, because I kind of have to enter this into Magic Arena before someone else sees the code during the video and enters it in instead. So you get a bit of added value. You get the deck in physical form and also on Magic Arena as well too. So one day in the future, Travis and I may do a online version of the Mana Cave where we battle it out with Planeswalker decks using Magic Arena. For now, we're going to do the good old-fashioned paper Magic, but this does add a bit of extra value and gives you a bit of incentive to sort of jump on Magic Arena and try it out. Alrighty, now that I'm done showing you guys the actual contents inside the box, let's start going through the deck itself. We're going to do this by first talking about the Planeswalker, then I'm going to go through the 3 other cards that are exclusive to the deck. After that, I'm going to be going through the cards first by creatures, then by non-creature spells, and I'll be doing that in order of converted mana cost, starting from the lowest, going on up to the highest. And to kick things off, we're going to be talking about Gruul's Mohawked Messiah of Mayhem. It is Domri City Smasher. For 4, a red, and a green, you get a 4 loyalty Planeswalker. His +2 is creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain haste until the end of turn. His -3 is Domri City Smasher deals 3 damage to any target. And his -8 is put 3 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. Those creatures gain trample until the end of turn. Now, first off, his cost is 6, which is high, but it's very typical for a Planeswalker deck. Planeswalker, his loyalty is only 4, which isn't great. It doesn't give him a huge amount of survivability, but he does have a +2 ability, so that's going to allow you to pump him up fairly quickly. So +2, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain haste until the end of turn. Now, being able to give your creatures haste is always nice. However, a lot of the creatures in this deck have either haste already or riot, so that may not be a huge impact, but still, there are some that do not have that ability. However, being able to give all your creatures +1/+1 is very useful, especially if you have 3 or 4 of them on the board already. Now, his -3 ability, which is kind of high because it is going to knock his loyalty down to 1 if you use it on the first turn he comes into play, is deal 3 damage to any target. Every Planeswalker, I've actually mentioned this before with some of the other Planeswalkers, every Planeswalker you play, you want it to have some way of protecting itself once it hits the board. This is that type of protection. It's the possibility of killing off one of your opponent's creatures. If your opponent doesn't have creatures, you can go straight to the face with it, which is great as well too, or hit another Planeswalker with it, which is even better sometimes. Granted, it's not unconditional removal, it's not simply destroy target creature, but it also has the versatility of being able to be used on any target. And there's a very good chance, especially if you're playing against the Dovin deck, that you will be able to knock out one of their creatures with that ability if you need to. Now, the -8 ability, of course, all those abilities that are the ultimate abilities on Planeswalkers are pretty impressive, and this is put 3 counters on each creature you control. Those creatures gain trample until the end of turn. This is something that can be very, very powerful if you're able to get it off, and given the fact that he starts at 4, and he has a +2 ability, there is the possibility you could do this on turn 3 after he comes into play. So when you compare that to the Dovin Planeswalker from the Planeswalker deck, which would take 5 turns to get up to his ultimate, that's actually pretty good. So yeah, overall, I think it's definitely not the worst Planeswalker they've ever come out with for the Planeswalker decks. It's not the best, but it's up there. It's not bad. Okay, next up, we're going to talk about the other 3 cards, which are exclusive to Domri's deck, starting with Domri's tutor card, and that is Domri's Nodorog. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with the Planeswalker decks, each of them come with some sort of card which will allow you to call up your Planeswalker from the graveyard or the deck itself. There was an exception to this with the M19 Planeswalker decks, but for the most part, this has been a mainstay of all the other Planeswalker decks. Now, getting back to Domri's tutor card, for 3, a red and a green, you get a 5/3 beast creature. It has trample, and when it enters the battlefield, you may search your library and or graveyard for a card named Domri City Smasher. Reveal it, put it into your hand. If you search your library this way, shuffle it. So that tutor effect is exactly the same as all the other tutor cards except for the M19 ones. This one comes in the form of a creature, which is rare. It's happened before, but it is kind of rare. So other than that, there's not really much to say about this particular tutor card other than the fact that you get 2 copies of it. Moving on to one of the other exclusive cards, it is another creature. It is Charging Warboar. For 1, a red and a green, you get a 3/1 boar creature with haste. As long as you control a Domri Planeswalker, Charging Warboar gets +1/+1 and has trample. So yeah, another staple with the Planeswalker decks, a creature that gets better if you have the Planeswalker in question on the board. Now, keep in mind, it doesn't have to be this specific Domri Planeswalker. The tutor card looks for a specific Domri Planeswalker, This one just needs any Domri Planeswalker on the board. However, even if you don't have your Planeswalker out, it still has haste. So ideally, you can get this out on turn 3 and swing in immediately for 3 points of damage. And this card is sort of a sign of things to come with this deck. It's all about getting creatures out there, having them hit the board, running with haste, smashing into your opponent, knocking them out as quickly as possible. It's all about aggro. And in the case of the Charging Warboard, you're going to get 3 copies of this in the deck. Next up, we have the final card, which is exclusive to this deck, and it is a sorcery, Ragefire. For 1 and a red, Ragefire deals 3 damage to target creature. Now, yes, this is definitely a watered down bit of burn. It is as powerful as Lightning Strike, but at sorcery speed and can only target creatures. You do get 4 of them in the deck, which is nice, and it's really just meant to sort of clear the way so that you can swing in with your own creatures and not have to worry about blockers. So it is definitely far from being the best bit of burn that could have been included in this. However, it is not the worst one they've ever come up with, even when it comes to ones that are exclusive to the Planeswalker decks. And now that we've talked about all the cards that are exclusive to the Planeswalker deck, let's move on to the other cards, which are all available in regular packs of Ravnica Allegiance. And of those cards, only 3 of them are going to be non-creature spells. The rest are all going to be creature spells, and we're going to start with 2 copies of Feral Macaw. Basically, it's just a very vanilla creature. It's a red bear. It's a 2/2 for 2. Now, if you watched the Dovin Planeswalker deck opening and overview, I really went into detail with a lot of the cards as to how you can use them, when you can use them, what your sort of strategy can be with them, because it wasn't as straightforward of a deck. This deck, I'm not going to have to talk about most of these creatures for very long because the strategy is simple. You attack, you try to kill your opponent as quickly as possible. And the next creature you're going to be trying that with is Gravelhide Goblin. You get 2 copies of this 2-drop. For 1 and a red, you get a 2/1 Goblin Shaman, and it also has pay 3, 1 green. Gravelhide Goblin gets +2/+2 until the end of turn. Now keep in mind, that's not a tap ability, and it's something you can do over and over. So if you play this late in the game and you have the mana up, you could pump this up as many times as you have lands available. Next, we have a multicolored 2-drop. It is Zur-Ta Goblin. For red and green, you get a 2/2 Goblin Berserker, but it also has Riot. Riot is one of the new abilities, one of the better abilities, in my opinion, that came out with this particular set. I've been lucky enough to play around with Riot in the Magic Arena pre-release event, and it is incredible. It is very, very powerful, especially when you get to some of the larger creatures, which can swing in out of nowhere and immediately beat face. Next, we have another creature with Riot. This time, it is a 3-drop Clamor Shaman. For 2 and a red, you get a 1/1 Goblin Shaman. It has Riot, which we talked about before, and whenever it attacks, target creature an opponent controls can't block this turn. Now, you get 2 copies of this in the deck, and it can be a real game changer as well. There's been plenty of times where my opponent had a blocker up, or only 1 decent blocker up, had this in hand, I'm able to bring it out, even if you have to sacrifice it. Its ability to make one of your opponent's creatures unable to block really allows you to have a doorway open where you can slip a lot of extra damage through. So yeah, this might be a creature you want to hold back for just that right moment when you need to be able to sneak through with a lot of damage. Moving on, we have one of the slower creatures. It is Sylvan Brushstrider. For 2 and a green, you get a 3/2 beast, but when it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life. Now, this is the only bit of life gain I believe you're going to get in this deck, so enjoy it while you have it. Moving on, we have a 1/of Axebane Beast. For 3 and a green, you get a 3/4 beast. That's it, just a 3/4 body for 4. Moving on, back into the multicolored creatures, we have 3 copies of Frenzied Arnix. I think that's how you pronounce it, I'm not sure. For 2, a red and a green, you get a 3/3 Cat Beast. It has Riot and Trample, and pay 4, a red and a green, it gets +3/+0 until the end of turn. So if you think Riot is crazy, Riot with Trample is absolutely insane, because this can hit the board and immediately bleed through a blocker for extra damage. Next up, still in the multicolored creatures, this time it's just a 1/of though, we have Balrak Clan Crusher. For 3, a red and a green, you get a 4/4 Ogre Warrior. Tap it, remove a +1/+1 counter from a creature you control, it deals 2 damage to any target. Now, given the fact that Riot can have the ability to add +1/+1 counters to some of your creatures, there should be a few counters out there on the board that this can take advantage of. So if you happen to be in a bit of a stall and you only need to get a few more bits of damage through to win, this is sort of a good way to go. At the end of your opponent's turn, tap this, remove a counter from a creature you don't need it on anymore, and you're going to be able to get 2 damage to your opponent. You can also use it to take out a blocker as well too, and then clear the way for your attackers. So overall, it can be very, very versatile. Back now into the mono-colored creatures, we have Rampaging Rendhorn. For 4 and a green, you get a 4/4 beast with Riot. So yes, this either hits the board as a 4/4 with haste or a 5/5 creature for 5, which makes it better than just your average vanilla creature. Next up, we have another mono-colored creature, another 1-of, and this is Wrecking Beast. For 5 and 2 green, you get a 6/6 beast with Riot and Trample. I mentioned this before, Riot plus Trample can be absolutely devastating to your opponent. This can hit the board swinging immediately, and even if they have blockers up, you're still probably with a 6/6 going to get a lot of damage through. And that takes us to the final creature in this deck, and it is a doozy, both in cost, but in effect as well. It is the End Raise Forerunners. For 5 and 3 green, you get a 7/7 Vigilant Trampler with haste. And when it enters the battlefield, other creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain Vigilance and Trample until the end of turn. This is basically a game ender on turn 8. If you're able to get this out and you have any sort of board presence, you will probably win the game at this point, unless your opponent is able to do something pretty amazing to stop you. And I don't know if you've seen my sort of overview for the Dovin deck, but there are no counters in that white-blue deck, so I don't really know how Dovin would be able to deal with this if this were to hit the board. Okay, so now that we're done talking about the creatures that are there to swing in and beat your opponent to the ground, let's talk about the 3 remaining non-creature spells in this deck. First up, we have 2 copies of Stony Strength. For 1 green, you have an instant, and it's put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Untap that creature. This is a great sort of sneaky trick for playing on your opponent's turn when they're swinging in and think you don't have any defenders. You cast this on one of your creatures for just 1 green. Not only are you pumping it up, you're untapping it, and now you have a beefy blocker on your side of the board. Next up, we have the only artifact in this deck, and it is a 2-drop Glass of the Guild Pack. Multicolored creatures you control get +1/+1. Fairly obvious why they include this, because you have a fair number of multicolored creatures in the deck. So if you can get this out early, those creatures, which already have a pretty big impact when they hit the board, are going to be even beefier. And that brings us to the final non-creature card in the deck, Burn Bright. You get 2 copies of this, and it's a 3-drop for 2 and a red. You get an instant. Creatures you control get +2/+0 until the end of turn. Now, this is one of those cards that you can hold back in your hand, bide your time, and then swing in and get lethal when your opponent was not expecting you to be able to do as much damage as this spell can provide. So yes, it does go great with the overall theme of the deck. However, that is it for all the non-land cards in the deck. So let's quickly talk about the mana base in this deck, and then we can move on to opening up a couple packs of Ravnica Allegiance. We've got 4 copies of Gruul Guildgate, 11 basic mountains, and finally 11 basic forests, giving you a grand total of 26 land. So there you go, folks. That is every single card in the deck from Planeswalker to land. Now, before I give you my overview of the deck and my overall thoughts on it, let's get to those packs right now. And here we go with the 2 packs of Ravnica Allegiance that came with the Domri deck. We're going to open up this one first. Now, because there's just 2 packs, I'm going to savor this opening a bit. I'm going to read off each of the cards, not fully, but the names of all the commons, uncommons, and then I'll fully read off the rare. So sit back and enjoy. We have Hasda Officer, Persistent Petitioners, Rubble Belt Runner, Prowling Caracal, Steeple Creeper, Carrion Imp, Rakdos Locket. Man, it looks badass. That is one badass looking locket. Chillbringer, Rubble Reading, Summary Judgment, Rally to Battle, Sphinx of the New Prov, that sounds right, Prov. Sphinx of the New Prov, which is the first, oh no, it's the second uncommon. Sorry, actually, I blew right by the fact that Rally to Battle was the first uncommon. This is the second uncommon. The third uncommon is Knight of the Last Breath. And our rare in this first pack is Priest of Forgotten Gods. For 1 and a black, you have a 1/2 human cleric. You can tap it, sacrifice 2 other creatures. Any number of target players each lose 2 life and sacrifice a creature. You add 2 black to your mana pool and draw a card. There are a lot of decks I can see this being super useful, and I actually had it played against me in a sealed event as well too. It didn't do too well because the opponent didn't have like a token strategy or anything going, but I can definitely see certain decks where this would be very, very useful. Then we have the Guildgate. Now, I've opened up 2 packs of this previously, and each time it's been a Guildgate. I didn't realize it was going to be that, so I think every single pack has a Guildgate, which is kind of nice. So here we have Rakdos Guildgate. Enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap it for black and red. Black or red, not black and red. And then finally, we have a 1/1 human token. By the way, if you like Magic the Gathering style tokens, we have a Token of the Month club that we do through the channel, where we have tokens exclusive to Brain Pulp TV, and you can sign up for it and get between 1 to 10 tokens sent directly to your door. Actual physical printed tokens sent directly to your door. There'll be a link taking you some information. That's the end of that spiel. I won't mention it again. Moving on to the next pack. Here we go. Opening this sucker up now. Gonna do the same thing. Gonna read off all the cards and then fully read off the rare. We have Spear Spewer, Concordia Pegasus, Quench, Rubble Slinger, Undercity Scavenger, Sagitar's Volley, that might be the right pronunciation, Blade Juggler, Justicar's Portal, Final Payment, Act of Treason. I love playing this card in drafts and sealed events. Our first uncommon is Rakdos Firewheeler, Eyes Everywhere, Resolute Watchdog, and our rare card is a Blood Crypt. Nice. It's one of the shock lands. Excellent. This is the first one of these I've ever pulled open in a pack of anything, so pretty happy about that. We've got Blood Crypt. It's a land. It's both a swamp and a mountain, so you can tap it for either black or red. And as it enters the battlefield, you may pay 2 life. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped. So these are very sought after. I would have loved the Simic one, but I'm not going to turn my nose up at the Rakdos one as well too. So I'm pretty happy about that. And of course we have the regular Guildgate, which is the Gruul Guildgate. So it enters the battlefield tapped, and you can either tap it for red and green. And our token is a Spirit token. Alrighty, so now it's time for some final thoughts on the Domri deck, and I quite like this deck. As far as Planeswalker decks go, I think it's quite strong, and a large part of that has to do with the Riot mechanic that's so prevalent within this deck. That is such a strong mechanic. I've played around with it in Sealed and a bit of Draft online, and it seems to do so well. And I think it's just going to absolutely stomp the Dovin deck when it comes to just the aggression. I mean, there's not a lot to this deck other than get your creatures on the board and start beating face. And I think this deck is going to do that very, very well. The only downside I see to this deck, which is actually a downside for a lot of red and green decks and decks like this, is the lack of card draw. You're so aggressive and you're able to get so many things on the board so quickly that your hand is empty before you know it, and then you're just in top deck mode through the entire rest of the game. Now, a lot of the time, you're okay because the added aggression that you put onto the board early on carries you through to the win. But if your opponent is able to stall you at any point, or even just get the upper hand with some favorable trades here and there, you can really be in a bad position, especially against the blue deck, which is able to restock its hand and draw a lot of cards. However, I don't really see that being too big of an issue, because the threats that you are able to get on the board, especially early on, that you're able to either like pump up with Riot or give haste with Riot, I think that's going to counteract the fact that you may have an empty hand midway through the game, because I think with this deck, about midway through a normal game, you will have already won. So yeah, basically, I really like this deck. As far as a Planeswalker deck goes, I think it's quite strong. But let me know what you guys think, especially when you compare it to the Dovrin deck, if you guys get a chance to play against that deck with this deck. As well, too, if you have any questions or comments, or you just want to let me know how your pre-release went, please leave that in the comments section below. I'd love to hear from you guys. However, that is it for this video. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And also thank you for all the support you guys have been showing the channel, especially around the Planeswalker decks, because you guys really seem to enjoy these videos, the Planeswalker Deck Showdown videos. So I can't thank you guys enough for all the support you show when we do these videos. So now with all that said, take care everyone. Have a wonderful day, night, morning, evening, whatever it is, wherever you are. May all your pulls be mythics, and I'll see you all again very soon.